And so, we see Ambrose and his family pack up what belongings they have or can carry on their cart and begin the arduous trip eastwards across rugged country. The light is fading. Ambrose huddles in the corner of the horse-drawn cart and uses straw to keep himself warm. It starts to rain. Ambrose, dressed in rags, looks back at Loch Arrow. He doesn't know it yet, but this is the last time he will see this landscape. As they move slowly over the rough ground, he's thinking about British colonial rule. He's thinking what a drag this is.
You start with a really nice story about Robert Flaherty and his reluctance to want to edit the footage, to leave it in its sort of virtual state, in a way, the kind of anxiety that when you make something, you have to leave stuff out. So, did you have different edits of this film? I mean, did you have to leave things out in terms of this?
We definitely left things out that we shot, but when we made the film, we edited as we went along. So we filmed and put things on the timeline, and then allowed that to direct where we might go next. So it wasn't a traditional way of working. We kept going back and forth between the two, but there was a point at which all the filming was done, and then you're left to make some of the difficult decisions about, what does stay and what goes, and things that we really loved did go in the end. But I think the editing process it's always like that. You kill your darlings, isn't that the expression? The whole idea was to gather material and to be open to the direction that the two stories brought us in, and then what happened when we went to the places associated with these two characters, and to be really open to that. So we didn't have a plan as such beyond where we're going next with the camera. We tried to absorb and soak in as much as possible, which means you've got a film with too much material, and then there is the process of trying to make those difficult decisions. One of the things that did happen to us, though, was when we filmed Alan and Denise to do the voiceover. We originally booked them in for 6 days each, and we worked with them for 5 days, and we worked with both of them together, and we felt we knew how that element was going to work in the film. And then when we tried to weave that into the timeline, it just didn't work. So luckily we'd only used 5 of our 6 days, so we could bring them back. We decided keep them apart. We'd probably all work much better because they're both real chatters, and it's be really disciplined. So we were able to work things out and have the opportunity to go back. And that's a luxury not afforded very often. So I think we just got lucky in that instance. But actually it was like a rehearsal. It helped us to understand what worked about the voiceovers, and it also helped to clarify what wasn't working. And then when we went back, we filmed Alan one day, Denise the next day, and something that happened by pure accident, we didn't even see it happening as it happened, we only saw it happening in the edit, was this change from day into night for both of them, which was just a real happy accident, and something we were grateful for, but it wasn't planned. I wish I could say it was, but it wasn't.
Ambrose looks at his parents' faces for clues. It's clear they're not happy at all. Perhaps they too think this is something of an inconvenience. Perhaps they're thinking of Irish nationalism here, or maybe they're thinking of the injustice of it all. Perhaps what they're really thinking of is the humiliation.
The voiceover kind of technique, if you like, is that important to your sort of storytelling practice? Is it a way of adding a layer on top of the images?
Well, we knew that it's important to documentary because, we haven't made a documentary before. We know it's a very important element to documentary, particularly if you're not using talking heads. But we didn't want to have a single voice, disembodied voice, a narrator. we wanted to bring another element. We wanted two voices. We wanted a male voice, a female voice. I guess, in a way, Denise and Alan were like stand-ins for myself and Joe. If we were better performers and were crack performers, we probably would have done the job ourselves. But it's really nice to have a stand-in. And their performance was important. And a lot of the times that happens off camera in a recording booth. But we know Alan and Denise very well. And so we knew that the performance of the material and the playfulness, hopefully, of our approach would come through in their delivery. And then the interaction they have with us behind the camera.
So you always intended to have them on screen as such?
Oh yeah,
Right.
yeah. I think you always look for something in terms of how the structure is going to work. And right from the beginning, we, well, not really right from the beginning, when we applied for the money, it was a road trip, so things changed. And when we applied for the money, it was just Ambrose O'Higgins. And when we applied for the money, there was going to be a lot more stuff shot in Chile. And, you know, that's the document that got us to the point where we got the money. But then, you know, with this particular project, we could kind of start all over again and approach it with a kind of a clean slate. And that's why we ended up with Helen, although she was never in the application form. And the road trip went very, very quickly. And then because they were going to be driving a car, and you know, one of them driving and one of them talking, but that's a bad idea anyway. So the placing it inside this room and the recording to camera, that emerged as an idea, but it's only when you do something like that and then get it onto the timeline you can begin to really understand how it works and how it might work. So we might have had an idea in our head, but we did have to have a second go at this, because we certainly didn't get it right first time round.
In the biopic, they will have a long journey in which to dwell upon this humiliation. A humiliation that Ambrose will learn much about in the coming years.
We, the first time we worked with Alan and Denise, it was September, and we brought them back then, I think it was in October, but by then we knew how it needed to work, so we knew that we could just slot it in. So that was quite late in the day, because we premiered the film then in February, and it was kind of more or less all wrapped up in terms of post-production. The end of December, beginning of January. Yeah, but it came in late, but we knew it, and we also do temp versions, so we do it all ourselves and put it as a temp file. So it was okay to film that very late in the day. I guess he'd be the obvious contender in Ireland to play a character like that, or at least to play one stage of Ambrose O'Higgins' life, and we wanted an actor, and he's somebody we know. When he saw the film, he liked the film. What he really liked is that there's a UK newspaper, The Guardian, and you know, for film lovers, it's the go-to paper to see the reviews. And we did get a 5-star review, and they put Aidan's picture, so he thinks that's the only thing I've ever got a 5-star review for, and my picture was slapped in the paper, so he's very glad that he did it. Yeah, but he's brilliant. He's one of those actors who is very open and works in a whole different range of ways and is always looking to challenge himself. And he had half a day free, and we just grabbed it. He's got a busy schedule, so we were lucky that it all worked out timing-wise.
You mentioned in the film this idea of, I was discussing earlier with someone about, in Ireland there are often no traces of family homes, and that they merge back into the land after a generation. Plus, as you say, we had the IRA burning down the old Anglo family stately homes around about 1921. Can you say a little bit more about the idea you mentioned, that the Irish landscape has a knack for hiding history's traces?
Yeah, I guess it's not just the landscape. We want to eradicate the shameful or humiliating parts of our history. So if you think of the Magdalen laundries, and there's an ongoing debate in Ireland at the moment about what to do with one of the still standing Magdalen laundries, and they want to turn it into a hotel. They want to pretend it was never there. And there's a big, protest that's ongoing to stop that. And has actually managed to intervene and put a stop to the proposals, the planning proposals. But I think countries do that.
So it's about colonialism
Yeah.
and about trying to. But there's also the nativised Gaelic culture. I mean, Ambrose presumably came from a kind of Gaelic aristocracy kind of family.
Yeah, you'd have to put that in inverted commas. They had a position in relationship to the land in their parish, in the townland, so that they owned land and owned a house, and you either,
But before they were disenfranchised by the British, they would have been a family of status and land?
Not really.
Okay.
Yeah, not really, because you see the circumstances in which they lived, in which the family home was, but there would have been a proud association with the land that they owned that would have gone down through the generations. So they were, so many Irish families, they owned the land. It was colonialism, obviously, that took the land off them, unless people converted to Protestantism. So there would have been but it's difficult to say. Okay, so he's the Baron of Ballinary, but what does that actually mean? Was he even the Baron of Ballinary? We don't know. It's the title that he gave himself when he arrived in South America, and he got paperwork to support that, but that doesn't exist. And it's contested whether he was or whether he wasn't, and whether he just used it to aid his promotion. But I prefer the idea that he reinvented himself as the Baron of Ballinary. The video footage is from a play that we did. She would have been, okay, so we're in a kind of a personal family territory. Helen talked about things. We have her talking on tape about that period of time that she spent in New York. And we obviously speculate. We build on what we know, the information that she gave us. But she has had there's parts of her life that are rooted in mental ill health. She struggled to go back to that place. And she did go back, as you know, to New York. We say it in the film. But there's a whole aspect to that journey back to New York which was not very good for Helen and was deeply problematic, because she went back to re-engage with her mother. And this is the bits that we leave out because we didn't want to dig into that personal stuff. So I don't know. I think she would have probably liked it. She would be game for something like that. She's a really big personality, larger than life. But I don't know. You've asked me something difficult there. I'm not really sure. Don't know. Oh, sorry. What I should say is that we showed the film to all of Joe's siblings, and for us, and also to Helen's brother and his wife, and Helen's half-sister, because she also had a sister who was born after her birth father died and her mother remarried. And so there's a lot that we know about their family history through those relatives, but everybody was really happy with what we did, and I guess we looked for that, and we wanted them to be happy about the film, and they were. So
you had her lit with for the infinity kind of black background there, didn't you? And it was really interesting that in her eyes you could see the reflection of the
ring lights.
LED.
Yeah, it was
whatever it was, the kind of square.
Yeah, it's a light that's used. I mean, we did our version of it because we built almost like a confession box, actually, for anyone who's ever been inside a confession box. You've got the curtains, and there's the gap. And when we filmed that was years ago. That was back in the 90s. The camera was behind, and because we filmed more than just Helen, there was a number. You saw them in that kind of shooting motif.
Why were they firing guns?
The play was looking at the Playboy of the Western World, and it's this act of violence And we got them, they talked in the play, in our theatre production, about lots of things, including violence, and we wanted them to shoot a gun and to capture the moment of, because although it's a replica gun, it acts and behaves like a real gun. But that's gone back a long time. I can't remember exactly why, but it made a lot of sense in the play that we did. And of course we have that footage and we've never gone back to it until we started to make Further Beyond. It brought us back to this wonderful DV footage that we have from, back in the 90s.
Any more questions? Yeah?
Thank you for a wonderful, wonderful film.
Thank you.
And now I was wondering, how did you find the story, and why isn't it important to you?
Why isn't
it important to you? How did you find the story?
Well, I was trying to explain to John earlier, the story, there are two stories about Irish people leaving Ireland for different reasons. And I think as an Irish person and the place of emigration in our psyche, our history, our culture, those stories are replicated again and again and again. You can interchange those stories with any other set of stories. There's loads of people to take Helen's place and loads of people to take Ambrose O'Higgins's place, actually, even in South America, because the Irish went to South America through Spain and into the colonies and the Spanish colonies. And so there's loads of historical figures it could have been, but it just happened to be them. And what we wanted to do was to tell two stories. They're not related, and they unfold in different historical times and in different places. But it's to tell stories of emigration, because we don't think about the stories when, for example, we're confronted with the endless footage we see. I think Nilgun talked about that a lot in her presentation and at the panel, but it's something that we have thought about. And in a way, they could be in our stories, my story, Joe's story, what takes you away, what is the longing, what's the desire, what's the feeling of belonging, what happens when you go away, what's your relationship to the country that you've left, etc. So the stories themselves, but the reason it ended up being Ambrose O'Higgins, because as we say in the film, we came across him as we were making this theatre production all those years ago, and he never left our mind. I think his story is very interesting, and some things just hang around. And Helen's story is also really interesting. And we didn't intend to include Helen initially, but then she found her way into the film very early on, once we got really started on the process. But they don't even have to be Irish stories. They're stories about people leaving their home.
Aren't we all, or haven't we all have histories of migrants, or my grandma and grandpa immigrated to Sweden from Finland, and I think most of us have this kind of histories, someone migrating, or so
we
and I think it's important to stress in these times of increasing nationalism. That's really,
I mean, we do, and we're very we're mindful of that. And so it's the particularities of their story are one thing, and we tell them in the way we tell them in the film, but they could be anybody's, really. It's to try and think about the narrative, the story, the person. In this instance, like for this moment, that's what we chose to do, and show the complexity of it. Particularly if you think about it in terms of this historical figure. Yes, and it's not specific to Ireland, as I said, although Ireland has its own very particular relationship to emigration, particularly when we think back to the famine, and that huge, almost halving of our population in that period of time in the 1800s. So it's quite particular. It's very raw, and still finding ways to try and deal with it actually as a young country. And of course the Irish have done well a lot of the times when they went abroad, not in the UK but in America. And you've got your St. Patrick's Day parades, and everybody wants to think that they got some Irish roots. Not everybody. People, it's something that still vaguely people are proud about.
I think it's true what you said, that there is a kind of universal aspect to it, but it is important to stress that in terms of the Irish experience, I mean, people leaving on those boats, I mean, it's a trauma, and families were, all families, had people moving, and, in my own family, people would leave young to America, and they may never come back, and apart from a few letters or something. So, I mean, it's something deep in the kind of Irish psyche in that sense, isn't it? I mean, it's not just people moving; it's the fact that every family is affected, and people are lost, and the contact is broken, and
for such a small country, and it's actually ongoing. It's changed because of the world that we live in, and so when I left in the 80s, you were dependent on writing letters home, and then you didn't know when you'd be next back in Ireland. And of course in the 50s there were lots of people who never came back. And although it's changed now because we've got Ryanair, we can fly back for cheap. We don't have to take the ferry and the train and the bus. I still think there's a lot of sadness in Ireland around the fact that we lose so many people, and we keep losing people all the time to emigration. But now there's a flow back. So I think there's more of a toing and froing. I don't think it changes how people feel every time they have to say goodbye, but we all know that anyway. It's not completely, Ireland has its own experience. And it's a small country, and it's got its own particular experience.
More questions? You use the phrase in the film, the thinking, and just below the thinking, the dreaming. Where did that come from? Was that just something that you wrote into?
It is probably something that we wrote. So, I mean, okay, where do any particular set of lines come from? I mean, I imagine that's, I don't know. Sorry, John.
No, it's very poetic. I just wondered if...
We dream a lot, and I don't know, how did that particular line end up in the film? I know it chimes at the conference, like the panel, the dreaming of home. Oh my God, John, I can't answer that question. Where did it come from? It's a very nice
idea of thinking as the notion of of what we're conscious of, and the dreaming as a kind of unconscious that comes to the surface, and even within the landscape that things kind of push up, and there are always reminders, even if we try and get by each day by day without us.
That's exactly what we intended. That's what we were thinking.
Yeah.
Sorry, John.
Well, I have one more question, unless anybody else has anything else they want to ask. Of course, what was it like filming in Cadiz and that side of the production? And did you sort of go there and find places, and was it a place where you did discover?
Cadiz is a little bit difficult. There's information that's known, very specific historical information that's known about Ambrose O'Higgins and his time in Cadiz, but it was very hard to find the exact house. Although there's a name, we couldn't find the exact house that he was associated with, because there are all these houses associated with the fact that Cadiz was this very important point of departure to the colonies, a very important port in Spain at the time. So they had these houses with these towers on the top of them, and they had the system flags to say whose boat was coming in and what was happening. But the thing about Cadiz is that Cadiz is one of those cities that has barely changed. And it's a walled city, so it's on the end of this kind of peninsula, and I don't know if people have been to Cadiz before, but I would strongly recommend it. It's such a beautiful city, but it's kind of as I imagine it was. And so for us it was a real revelation and a fantastic place to visit, because you could imagine yourself walking the very streets that Ambrose O'Higgins walked, and going up the stairs, being on top of the towers that he would have been on top of, and having the views that he would have out to sea. And actually, one of the things that didn't make it into the final film was a ship that was docked in the port during our stay that had come from Chile, and there was a whole history associated with that ship, and it was in the film for a long time, and then we just knew we had to get rid of it. It was like a tangent too far. But yeah, it's that idea that things do change and cities are reshaped and rebuilt, but some things actually remain pretty unchanged, and Cadiz is one of those places. So yeah, it was a very exciting moment for us in the making of the film to arrive in Cadiz and to understand what it was and what it... I mean, obviously we don't understand what it was like for him, but actually there is a whole new set of immigrants in Cadiz, of course, and this has been discussed over the last couple of days. Refugees and economic migrants who are trying to find their way in that city, as there are in places all across Europe. So it gives us some sense of what it would have been like for him, because he would have arrived with nothing and would have to have started from nowhere, not even having the language, and to fend for yourself and every day, and to slowly, find a way to, to ultimately achieve what he achieved. I guess we're very admiring of him.
Good, well, thank you, Christine. We've asked you to do a lot at the conference, various recordings and everything else. So thank you very much, and thank you for showing the film tonight.
And thank you for screening us, John. Thank you to everybody, for actually being here this evening to watch us. Thank you.